That's smoke. Now that's normal. All right, I did it. But it doesn't give the right kind of smoke. Urgent! Hundreds of Ukrainian drones have broken into the heart of Russian cities. Moscow's air defense has been breached. The apocalypse has begun. Airports are paralyzed, Russians are panicking, and our forces have unleashed terrible vengeance on the enemy. The Ukrainian armed forces launched missiles at high-value targets in Russia. Russians have been left without water and electricity. Russia is experiencing real hell. More on all of this coming up. Watch until the end. Ukraine welcomes you today. I'm Renata Slanov, and here are the latest events. Breaking news. A night of terror for Russia. A massive drone attack on Moscow, Belgorod and Rostov. Authorities are in panic, airports are paralyzed, and hundreds of drones broke through to the Russian capital.
Everyone go home.
Moscow Mayor Sobyanin was frantically reporting from evening until morning about allegedly 15 drones shot down over the capital. Not a word about the real consequences of the attack, only about debris falling after being shot down. Sheremetyevo implemented the plan cover, arrivals and departures only with special permission. Domodedovo and Zhukovsky were paralyzed twice during the night. Dozens of flights were cancelled. In the front row of the fire show, Belgorod was also present. According to Astra, the Luch CHP plant was hit. It's one of the city's key stations. The governor of the region reported the attack on Belgorod. According to him, the city was hit by a missile strike. As a result of the shelling, there is serious damage to engineering facilities. The windows in 6 apartment buildings and 1 private house were damaged. As Russian media note, the Luch CHP is a gas turbine combined heat and power plant in Belgorod and one of the city's main energy and heating stations. Its main fuel is gas and it supplies electricity and heat to part of Belgorod's districts. The governor of the Rostov region reported that UAVs allegedly attacked several districts of the region. He says the car was damaged, roofs were blown off, and windows shattered. He also noted that due to damage to power lines in the Kupiansk district, the operation of the water intake and pumping station has been halted. The Ministry of Defense boasts that 130 Ukrainian drones have supposedly been intercepted. Of these, 25 over Moscow, 8 over Belgorod, and 8 over Rostov. But the reality is different. Cities are on fire, airports are shut down, people are left without water and electricity. And no, the footage is not from Kyiv or any other Ukrainian city, but from Rostov. A night apocalypse in Astrakhan. The gas processing plant burst into blue flames after the drone attack. Satellites recorded a massive fire at the facility, and videos captured the roar of drone engines as they easily pierced through Russia's supposedly impenetrable air defenses. The drones entered Astrakhan around midnight. Russians, panicking, filmed everything on video. The footage shows a hellish fire at the Astrakhan gas processing plant. Eyewitnesses are screaming. Everything is burning. A direct hit on the production of Enersal granulated sulfur, the very same sulfur Russia uses to make explosives for its weapons. A devastating blow to the Kremlin. Zelensky gives the green light to Ukrainian Sapsan ballistic missiles. Russia is experiencing true hell. And this is only the beginning. The armed forces of Ukraine are preparing strikes from which the Kremlin simply won't have time to recover. All the sensational details are in the report.
Sapsan in action. The armed forces of Ukraine have begun using domestically produced ballistic missiles to strike the enemy. The exact specifications of the Sapsan missile are not disclosed, but its deployment by the Ukrainian military will allow them to strike enemy targets, possibly even more effectively than with ATACMS. Ukrainian missiles have twice the explosive power, fly faster, and have a greater range.
What is the exceptional advantage of using the Sapsan operational tactical complex? It's that its use against targets both on the territory of the Russian Federation, indeed primarily on the territory of the Russian Federation, as well as against legitimate military objects in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. This is exclusively the sovereign right of the Ukrainian side itself.
In addition to Sapsan, the Ukrainian army is also using several other domestically produced missiles against the aggressor country. This was stated by the President of Ukraine.
This indicates that the Ukrainian side, despite the intensity of strikes on defense industry enterprises, has managed not only to preserve the infrastructure of its defense industry, but also to expand and scale up the production of its own strike weapons. This testifies to the presence of qualified engineering personnel and there is sufficient funding for Ukrainian defense industry enterprises, which are capable of scaling up the production of Ukrainian-made strike weapons. Virtually all Ukrainian strike weapons are made exclusively from Ukrainian components.
Let us recall that in September of this year, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukraine is actively developing long-range weaponry. He stated that the tests were successful and the next stage is the launch of serial production. Earlier, Ukraine began production of Flamingo cruise missiles with a range of up to 3,000 kilometers. On Friday, December 5th, the company Firepoint delivered another batch of cruise missiles to the Ukrainian military. Also in November, the armed forces of Ukraine attacked important targets on Russian territory. Long Neptune missiles were used for the strikes. Another of the most important developments has been drone missiles such as Polyanitsia, Peklo, Ruta, and Bars.
The Ukrainian side is ready to scale up and deploy its own strike assets across the territory of the Russian Federation. This referred to the Sapsan and accordingly the Flamingo. In addition, Ukraine's defense forces have scaled up the production of strike drones with a target range of over 1.5 kilometers.
Ukrainian UAVs are successfully striking military targets in the Russian Federation, and oil refineries are also in the crosshairs of drone systems.
It was precisely the use of their Ukrainian strike assets that effectively allowed to block the operation of about 40% of Russian oil refineries. According to the Russian side itself, losses to the Russian budget are estimated at around $100 billion. But it should also be noted that the Ukrainian side does not intend to stop at these achievements.
Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has ramped up weapons production and the implementation of new technologies, which are already being used at the front. The volume of domestic weapons production has increased by dozens of times. Thanks to private companies, Ukraine will be able to create innovations in the defense industry and effectively implement them on the battlefield.
Starting from the new year, the Ukrainian defense industry and the defense forces of Ukraine will receive Ukrainian ballistic missiles with a target range of about 800 kilometers. It should be noted that the manufacturing company claims to have developed 2 ballistic missiles with strike ranges of up to 200 and, respectively, up to 800 kilometers.
All this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weaponry that destroys important enemy military targets at great depth. Hell, not only in the rear but also at the front, an explosive turn of events. The Kupiansk cauldron has closed and the Russians have fallen into a complete trap. The Ukrainian armed forces have achieved the impossible. The Russian army is cut off, blocked and panicking. One less occupier aircraft. Ukrainian drones are destroying everything in their path and turning the front into a real hell for Russia. Watch the hottest news from the front lines.
A cauldron for the occupiers in Kupiansk. Analysts from the Deep State Project have reported on the successes of Ukrainian defenders in the northwestern outskirts of the city. In particular, Asinta reports that as a result of a successful operation, the enemy's defense forces have been blocked. At the same time, enemy enclaves still remain in the central part of Kupiansk.
The operation began with the establishment of a line blocking and cutting off the enemy garrison in the city from its main forces. The defense forces rather swiftly occupied a number of Kovka and Kondrashovka and also brought Holubivka under fire control. After that, Myrna was cleared. The occupier's Soviet name, Moskovka, comes from the northwestern outskirts of Kupiansk itself.
At the same time, the defense forces continue to identify and eliminate the occupiers. The operation is ongoing. As a result of another well-coordinated operation by the armed forces of Ukraine, an enemy column was destroyed. The occupiers tried to take advantage of the weather conditions and, using armored vehicles, cars and motorcycles, attempted to break through from the northern part of the city to the southern part. But the plan failed. On their way, they were met by fighters from the 7th Air Assault Corps and the 68th Jaeger Brigade. However, the fog turned out to be an advantage for the Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups. Thus, for the fighters of the main intelligence directorate, still in the Pokrovsk direction, thanks to poor visibility, they managed to infiltrate the enemy's rear. The Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group also managed to destroy the occupiers' command post during their raid. In recent days, among others, the drone forces have distinguished themselves in destroying enemy forces. The latter set incredible records. In 2 days, drone pilots destroyed 2 battalions of enemy troops. And this is just the beginning. The previous evening, the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, callsign Madhyar, reported that his pilots had only 1 kill to their credit. Part-time, 505 occupiers. Most of them are paratroopers from the 76th Division who were redeployed to Donbas.
That's all you need to know about the current pressure on the front line. The Dobropilsky, Pokrovsky and Gulye-Polye sectors. The average daily SBS figure in November was 282 worms. 8,473 specimens over 30 days. The average daily number for 11 days in December is 395 bodies per day, already totaling 4,325. Knock on wood. With
each passing day, the occupiers are losing not only soldiers but also expensive equipment. For example, our general staff has confirmed the destruction of another Russian aircraft. The day before, a worrying piece of news spread through Z channels from Kacha, a base in temporarily occupied Crimea, where on the military airfield, a UAV struck an Antonov 26. The Russians also reported losses among their officer corps.
A UAV hit an An-26 on the ground. There are dead and wounded.
Another extremely alarming piece of news reached the Russian command from a place they least expected. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, together with the insurgent movement Black Spark, carried out a successful operation all the way in the Caspian Sea. Off the coast of Kalmykia, the saboteurs managed to strike 2 Russian vessels transporting weapons. We're talking about the sanctioned cargo ships Composer Rachmaninov and Askar Sarija, which Russia is using for military purposes.
It happened. Russia is entering the most difficult period of the war. The country is on the brink of apocalypse. Putin is trying to calm the people while economists are in a panic. There's not enough money, partners have turned away, and people are taking to the streets. The central bank is already selling gold. What awaits Russia next? All the details about the situation are there. Watch. Russia is entering the most difficult period of the war, and it's all because of the economy.
They decided that out of all the available tools, this one is actually more honest and straightforward. And it's more reliable to just go for this increase. Temporarily, I hope, but still an increase.
Putin keeps assuring his people that he has everything under control and that everything is going according to plan. Supposedly, there are successes at the front and the economy is allegedly growing. Moreover, he boldly claims that Russia is even ready for war with Europe if necessary. But in reality, the situation is far from comfortable. At the front, this was clearly demonstrated by the situation in Kupiansk, Kharkiv region.
Units of the West Group liberated the city, Kupiansk. That is, everything is finished completely. The city is definitely under our control.
However, Kupiansk was not captured. On the contrary, Russian military personnel there found themselves surrounded. And in the economic sphere, the problems are clearly demonstrated by the sharp increase in taxes. After all, they need to get money from somewhere to continue the war.
The corresponding government plan has already been prepared as well. This is very important. We have discussed this repeatedly. In connection with the VAT increase, we need to make sure that nothing goes into the shadows, that everything operates legally, and that the corresponding revenues go to the budget.
Experts agree that the Russian economy is entering its most difficult period since the start of the full-scale war.
Russia, which used to be a gas station, has now turned into a country that imports light petroleum products. This is due both to sanctions and to the strikes by Ukrainian drones, which have shut down 20% of Russian oil refining.
Increasing military spending no longer stimulates the economy, and the budget deficit is growing, while Russia has no foreign investments or loans. Even China didn't help.
Putin's significant journey to China and his important request to discuss matters further with his Chinese comrades to grant the Russian Federation a stabilization loan ended with nothing. So, as of today, Russia currently possesses absolutely no viable mechanisms for external borrowing whatsoever. And the very last significant fund they have been able to utilize to cover their substantial budget deficit, specifically starting from the year 2022, is the National Wealth Fund, which is now, regrettably, almost entirely depleted. They started the war with 12 trillion in the fund. Now there is less than 2 trillion left in the fund.
Putin wanted so badly to bring the Soviet Union back to Russia that he didn't even notice how he dragged his country to this bottom.
Do you understand what the point is? Why do we say that the situation in Russia is even worse? At that time, the Soviet Union, for the most part, survived thanks to a huge amount of external borrowing. That is, if you look at the dynamics of the Soviet Union's debt over the last 7 years before its collapse, it was growing almost exponentially. The Russian Federation today has no borrowings. It is cut off from international financial markets. The collapse of the Soviet Union did not happen because of a revolt, not because of a revolution, but simply because the economy could not withstand it.
That's why the Kremlin has to raise taxes and increase domestic borrowing, which fuels inflation.
Raising taxes on businesses is truly like killing the very goose that consistently lays the golden eggs. If we carefully look at the current situation in the civilian economic sectors of the Russian economy today, it's an absolute and utter nightmare.
Despite the repressive system, public discontent is growing, especially in the regions. Funds for the regions.
And
Putin is simply destroying small businesses with his taxes. Entrepreneurs even asked Putin not to raise taxes. But the crisis hasn't only affected small businesses. Throughout this year, the media has repeatedly reported that large enterprises have started laying off employees because they can't pay their wages.
We are the team from the Nizhny Tagil division Novolek company working on the construction site of the Volkovskoye deposit phase 3. We are building a beneficiation plant for processing copper, iron, vanadium ores at the Volkovsky mining and processing plant near the town of Kushevo in the Sverdlovsk region where we are currently located. We would like to inform you that this organization has not paid advances or salaries for 2 months now.
Meanwhile, Avtovaz, which the Kremlin wants to present as the pride of the Russian automotive industry, is losing its employees. Since September alone, Avtovaz has cut salaries from 100,000 to 50,000. They have cancelled bonuses and overtime pay. People have started fleeing the plant and the cars are being produced in terrible condition. They break down right in the showrooms.
Did it get burnt in this showroom?
No, it didn't actually get burnt.
That's patina. And did they manage to finish burning this part at the factory?
The crisis has also affected such an important sector in Russia as the nuclear industry. In the Ulyanovsk region, about 300 builders of a nuclear facility went on strike due to unpaid wages. They also refused to continue working.
Lately, since June, we've been experiencing wage delays. Month after month, the delays last up to a month and a half. Accordingly, there are also delays with vacation and travel allowances.
Previously, similar labor unrest occurred in Primory. Workers spent the night at the enterprise and even threatened to jump off the roofs. And all of this happened because welders, electricians, and installers were forced to take extreme measures. They were protesting against unpaid wages. And these are just a few cases out of hundreds of others. The Kremlin is trying to squeeze as much money as possible from within the country. That's why there are already ideas being voiced about taxes for the childless. If they don't increase the birth rate, let them pay too.
Then go ahead and pay up, folks. What? A tax for a decent old age if you don't want to have children.
There is no external lending. Even Russia, as a so-called gas station country, has to import oil. Experts to a person are quite shocked by such Kremlin policies.
What can be said about the state of the Russian economy when the central bank has officially announced that it is starting to sell its strategic gold reserves?
Interestingly, the mood of the people clearly shows they are not willing to keep living like this. According to sociologists, 88% of Russians now want the war to end. Even though back in 2022, the majority supported Putin. But today, everyone has to tighten their belts. Both factory workers, ordinary Russians, and even the military. After all, despite the promised millions for killing in Ukraine, Russian soldiers are often left with nothing. For the population, the war no longer brings pride or optimism. And the Kremlin understands this perfectly well. But does that stop Putin from dragging his country down and sinking in this war?
When we talk about the Russian Federation, we need to understand that what is happening there now is extremely similar to what happened in the Soviet Union. This also applies to the harshest dictatorship. It concerns a very serious strengthening of law enforcement, and therefore, it is for this reason that I wouldn't harbor any significant illusions that tomorrow Russia will quite suddenly rise up in opposition and stage some truly massive public protest.
That's why Putin couldn't come up with anything better than to ensure his own peace of mind by making sure people don't even think about protesting or rebelling.
Do you know which budget areas for 2026? In the Russian Federation, these areas received the largest increase in funding compared to 2025. It's the police, the National Guard, and state propaganda. In fact, funding for propaganda was increased by 1.8 times in 2026. Billions of rubles.
The Kremlin is increasing pressure on the people, but at the same time understands that ending the war or reducing military spending won't instantly solve all the problems. After all, the country's economy has become dependent on the military industry. And that's where the circle closes. Peace will bring new difficulties, while continuing the war will break through a third bottom in the economic crisis. A country that was once developing has now backed itself into a corner. It seems even Vladimir Putin himself, the supreme leader, no longer truly knows what to do about this increasingly dire situation, so he persistently keeps on lying to his people. And the long-suffering Russian citizens continue enduring this oppressive reality so as not to anger their powerful Tsar father Putin, the authoritarian ruler.